Hello, welcome to my podcast. My name's Dylan, and this is my co-host, John Millette.
Hello. So, how are you today, Dylan?
I'm doing good today, John Millette. How are you?
Doing all right. What's today's topic?
So we're going to be talking about age regression. So to explain what age
Ooh.
regression is, it is an incident where an individual would regress to a younger mental state of themselves, or like compared to their current self, right? So you could say, let's
Right.
say the individual, for example, is a 30-year-old, man who suddenly,
Mm.
who reverts back to like a younger age, let's say like 10 years old,
Oh,
10 years old. Yeah.
okay.
So it's like, it's very, no, I think the whole concept in itself is very interesting considering it is also a form of therapy that, licensed therapists would recommend to patients.
Oh, didn't know that. Why do you think age regression, how is it caused?
Well, the way age regression works is that, it could be voluntary but also involuntary at the same time. It would kind of depend on
Mm.
how the person is feeling. Typically, um, what I've learned is that it is caused due to like high stress, high levels of stress, or even a traumatic incident
Right.
that causes them to revert back to a younger age. Like
Oh,
a
okay.
former self that was more pure and innocent, in my
Mm.
opinion.
So they're taking comfort in their childhood moments that were really comforting and not so stressful compared to times nowadays.
Yeah,
Right?
something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
But the thing is, I'm curious about is like why do people actually age regress? Because to me, I think the reason why I think people age regress is that you know to cope with like I mentioned before, trauma or high levels of stress. They the way they deal with it is that they they rather revert back to a younger age that can probably handle it better than their adult self. But I'm curious of why
Right.
you think people age regress.
Hmm. I mean, I think there's a great comfort in going back to times that weren't so challenging. As a kid, you had more freedoms. You could express yourself more without the judgment of society. Enjoy the media and hobbies that you had to the fullest because at the time you had, um, especially with mental illnesses like depression or PTSD, having something to go back on as comforting as your childhood is really helpful and also very comforting.
Oh, I
Why do
kind of
you
agree.
think people age regress?
Oh, I kind of do agree with that. You know, um,
Mm,
like I said, it's definitely trauma and stress based. I feel like too, like when you're a kid, you get away with a lot more as well compared to an
right.
adult because as a kid, you're not expected to know how the world works compared to an adult. But like,
Mm,
and those adults who do age regress, maybe they haven't handled like good ways of actually handling stress, and they
right.
rely on their kid self to help them out with that. Sort of like a
Yeah.
second
Deal with it.
personality. Like almost
Right.
like I think like
Mm,
something like dissociative identity disorder. Like then like
right. Hmm.
yeah.
Um.
Have you ever had
well,
like
I,
any experience with that?
I actually have two experiences. One in person with a old friend. They actually had DID, presumably, and they
Whoa,
would,
really?
yeah, um, they would. switch to their alter that was a child in group calls, and they would often like, throw fits if they didn't have things go their way.
Wait,
They were also dealing
really?
with, oh, yeah, they dealt with like a lot of problems back at home. Their parents weren't so kind and very restrictive. It also made me realize that even teenagers can age regress. It's not necessarily entirely adults, which I found to be very interesting. You'd think it'd only be adults, but even children technically can age regress as well.
Wow. Wait, so I'm curious though. So since you had IRL experiences, have they, when you know if your friend is gonna
Hmm,
age regress, is there like any warnings or any signs that before they start regressing to like a child? Because I feel like it would be very unexpected to them to start speaking, with an adult mannerism and then suddenly just start whining or crying like a toddler? Were there
right.
any signs like that?
I mean, I think it also really depends on the person. With that person in particular, since it was an alter, we kind of had to accept the fluctuation of it, like the sudden change in voice. Previously, we got to learn each alter and what their purpose was in their mental age, so we could quickly figure out which alter it was, like if it were a child or an adult. So that's how we had to figure it out.
Did they
With
have,
another experience of mine,
I was gonna
they would
ask,
typically announce.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. I
They would.
was gonna ask,
No,
like,
you're fine.
did they have like two different, like, since you said they had like essentially two identities, right? Did
Right.
they have to, did they have different names? Like, and like, did the
Yes.
alter had a different name compared to the one person you do know, or the one personality, I guess.
Yes. They so with DID, people have a system and it typically consists of multiple personalities, as in the name. So this person had around 28 whole personalities, the majority of them
Wait,
being
what? Wait, 28?
teenagers or yeah, 28 whole personalities. It can extend, however. The personalities are limitless. There's many examples of there was one person who had 101 personalities in total.
Oh,
It's a lot
is
to
it
keep up
limited?
with.
So you saying, different personalities, right? Does that also mean like different, like, do each personality have like their own different like genders or like any like trait, like quirks to
Hmm.
them that make them stand out compared to like,
Yes, they do. Um, They can have different races, ages, different, like, of course, personalities. They can be whole different people. Sometimes people will take characters from media and make them a personality, per se.
interesting?
So someone could have Harry Potter as a personality. And a person, it, sorry, my internet peaked. How am I ping?
Uh, uh, uh,
Oh,
I can't tell if it's me or
sorry.
you. No, you're good.
It's me.
Having technical
My bad.
difficulties. Um,
Yes.
so as you were saying that they can have like, but that's interesting though. You have technically have a personality of a character, but how does that, so so that's kind of similar, like it plays into age regression somewhat, because like each personality can
Yeah.
have a different age and stuff like that, right?
Mm.
So identity,
Yeah.
so each identity has their own age and stuff. So it does have a relation to age regression itself.
Yes, it can have a relation to age regression for sure.
Oh, interesting. No, I didn't
Yeah.
know that. I was
Yeah.
Well, I knew like the basics of age regression, but
Mm.
thinking more about it, I didn't realize how much more expansive it can get, which is very
Yeah.
interesting.
No, it's interesting for sure.
But yeah, I didn't want to interrupt with the second instance, but what was the second instance like compared to the first one?
Oh, right. So this person did not have DID, and they had major anxiety and depression, and they had like big emotional outbursts. So I actually met this person in Vrchat, we're currently in, and they often, when they got stressed, or they could even do it for fun in a way, like a child. So they would regress and take their mind off of it. They would often go with closer friends. I unfortunately was not a closer friend. So they go with their group and they put as their status age regressing. So people know to not like interrupt or barge in on something like that without prior knowledge. They would go like into the corner, do their voice. They would regress to around maybe a 3 to 5-year-old. Have
Wow.
fun like a kid, basically.
Like imitating pure innocence, or like I guess like you said, like a past childhood experience, right?
Yes.
Interesting. No, you did.
Oh,
No, sorry.
yeah. Okay. I also want to mention that this person was 12 years old, which I found interesting again, that another child could age regress.
Oh,
And it's really fascinating to me because stuff like, in media and what people say online, it's typically adults. But
yeah, I was gonna say
once
like
again,
adults.
it can be even younger children. Yeah.
That is interesting because yeah, like I said, when I was doing some research into it, typically it was more adult patients that were typically known to age
Right.
regress. But an actual child regressing to a younger form is pretty interesting on itself too, because they're already a kid. They don't really know as
Right.
much as an adult, so why would they need to regress further back than they already are?
Right. And I feel that's because, in some homes and environments, you're forced to become something bigger and become an adult so soon. So it causes it to, fasten, I guess. You feel like you don't get to have a childhood, so you take that time to really be a kid again. Something like that, I'm pretty sure.
I never actually gave that much thought to it. Like, like a person would age regress because they're missing a part of that childhood, like you said. It's just very unfortunate that
Right.
some kids had to actually grow up faster than other kids, less fortunate people, or
Exactly.
kids who have had really bad parents, which is understandable.
Mm.
So, but going back to, the first two instances, so there are some similarities with the two, both acting
Yes.
differently than their original persona, both,
Mm.
acting like kids and stuff like that. So, no, you did remind me as well that I actually seen, like, public instances where, a person would age regress, and then, but
Right.
unfortunately, when they do age regress to cope with like whatever stress they're dealing with, right? They get harassed by people who are unaware of that, right?
Right.
Which is, they don't know the context behind it. Probably a lot of people don't know about it, and then they get,
Mm.
upset. Like they're getting harassed by people who don't know about it. But at the same time, they decided to regress in a public instance. I understand that, it could be involuntary, but like a part of
Right.
me is like, there's probably a better place to do this, in my opinion, than a
Mm.
public instance. Like I want to go back to like IRL age regression, right?
Mm.
I feel like the difference between VR chat age regression and IRL age regression is, with IRL age regression, no one publicly knows about, your age regression, right? To them, you could be any
Typically.
normal person, but
Mm.
at home, when you're stressed out and stuff, then only the people that know about it, or, your own family and stuff like that, understand your age regression,
Right.
right? As to
Mm.
VR chat, where you would do it in a public lobby or something,
Right.
and then people like know what you're doing, but then like they're not compassionate or considerate. They harass you for it, thinking like, what is this guy
Right.
doing, or what is this person doing?
Mm. What I feel is in VR chat, it's definitely a more accepting environment despite the people who go into these public instances and harass them. Because typically, I mean, the videos that we see of these people harassing users that age regress is not the usual, right? I think these instances are typically with people who understand and who want to help those who are age regressing, and they have a more accepting and inviting environment for them. Now, doing it publicly is a bit iffy because you do want to maybe protect those people in there. So I feel like it'd be better to just get off the game and regress in a more private environment to make sure you aren't harmed. But then again, it's so difficult to find support groups in real life. You can't really just go up to someone and say, hey, I age regress. Yeah. It's very
Oh,
difficult, In a place like VR chat, a virtual world, you feel like you can get away or find a community like that more easily.
yeah. No, I agree with that. Definitely with online communities, you have to you can be more expressive and like find people who have similar interests with you, versus going up to people in person and asking them like for their interests. So it's like it's less of a gamble versus that. But however, I
Right.
feel like with online groups about it, you do it publicly or you do it online, it's less, there's less privacy to it versus, you know,
Right.
IRL, like in person. Because
Mm.
in person, again, you do have that agency of privacy that only your parents or your loved ones know that you age regress, right? But in an online
Right.
community, everything on the internet gets archived somehow, right? And like you
Right.
will you will get always get people that will harass you for it, you know, or just like you'll never
Right.
have that same privacy as in IRL, or
Doing
like
it in your home.
yeah, in person.
Yeah.
But I also feel like too,
That's true.
with the thing with age regression, specifically in VR chat though, it is a little bit of a concern because if if you look on the store page for VR chat, it is a 13 plus game, and you do have actual
Mm.
kids who play the game. And when these
Correct.
adults are age regressing in public lobbies where kids are available, granted, that's the game's fault too for mixing minors with adults, but like you get into a
Right.
dangerous situation where actual adults pretending to be kids are talking to actual kids, and then that becomes a whole mess on its own, because they
Right.
believe they're
Big
kids but they're
dilemma.
actually adults, and they're like getting lied to. Not saying that all age regressors
Right.
are doing it intentionally, right? But like
Yeah,
You
of
know,
course.
it
And
is dangerous.
it is. There is a big problem as well with some adults not entirely doing it to age regress per
Like the
se,
pretending to
more of
thing.
an age, yeah, and more of an age play thing, which is very concerning, especially because there's minors on this app. Um, like my two friends who age regress to comfort themselves, and they could be taken advantage of from these adults who aren't really age regressing and taking advantage of their weak mental state
Oh yeah,
and
no,
doing some
definitely.
really horrible things.
Like these, I feel like
Mm.
too that like bring on the topic of people pretending. I also feel like too that like some of these people actually use age regression as an excuse to actually age play, which is like oh like there
Yes.
that's like an excuse, but age regression is a serious thing that people use to
Right.
cope with their trauma. So pretending that or saying that you do have it, it's like kind of defeats the
Mhm.
purpose of it.
Right. It's very upsetting too. This can apply to most mental illnesses or coping mechanisms. People actually deal with these problems, and using them to get away with something or as an excuse is very unacceptable and hurtful to those who actually deal with these things.
That I agree with. So the bottom line, my opinions about age regression, I do think it is an acceptable treatment to to help people cope with trauma and stress like that. But
Mm.
it's unfortunate that it does get mixed up with age play, especially online, right, where people don't have that context behind the other person. Well, that's how I feel about it. How do
Exactly.
you feel?
I feel like it is an acceptable way to cope. It's much better than things like alcoholism or doing drugs to feel better and get rid of this pain. So it is a better alternative. I don't think it's the safest at times, especially if the coping mechanism can start turning into something else. I think, finding something a little safer would be the better alternative, but it's definitely better than most common coping mechanisms.
That I agree with. That I agree with. Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate
Well,
your time today.
mhm.
Thank you
Well,
for
thank you so
the
much. It was a
podcast.
very interesting topic, of course.
Of
Thank you for
course.
having me. I
Of
had
course.
fun.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.
Bye.